And we'll go ahead and get started. Again, I want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's evening. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Jamie Kidder. I am the National Outreach Director for College Living Experience. And also joining me are Katie Strong and Tom DeCossola, our CLE Austin and Denver Center Directors. And one of our favorites, Colin Cass, one of CLE's parent coach professionals. So Katie and Tom, do you guys want to take just a second to introduce yourselves? And then I think we'll give Colin a moment because he's a panelist. So we'll give Colin a moment to introduce himself when we have the panelists do introductions.
Sure, I'll jump in first. I'm Katie Strong. I'm the director here at CLE Austin. Thank you so much to our parents that are joining us tonight and all of you that are here to hear some of the information that we have to share. I've been part of the CLE community for 12 and a half years or so now, and served in a lot of different roles. I've been the director for the last, I want to say 5 years. I should have thought of that before I got in front of everybody. But I love the work that we do, helping young adults, walking alongside, partnering with young adults as they're figuring out what they want to do with their lives. And as I tell them, even in your mid-40s, you might still be figuring out what you want to do with your life. And that's okay. It's all a journey. And that's, where the fun comes in and the joy comes in. And so we get the privilege to partner with these young adults through part of that journey. And I'm very, very happy to be able to do that and to be here with y'all this evening.
Thank you, Katie. My name is Tom DeCossola. I'm in Denver, Colorado. I'm the program director of CLE Denver. I've been with CLE Denver since 2016, so I don't know, going on 8 years or so. And I've worked in independent living skills, in the academic team, and in my current role, I just love engaging with our students. I love our program. I love the staff, and I love our team nationally. We just got great folks, all around the country. But thank you to everyone who, is going to be on the panel, who came to just join and participate. Great to have everybody together. I know this is something we would love to do more of. So thank you for helping make this what it is and to help us, continue. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thanks, Tom and Katie. But you obviously did not log in to hear us talk about the student experience at CLE. So we are also joined by the parents of several CLE students, both currently attending and alumni, who want to share with you their perspective on their students' experiences while students at CLE. But before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. Because we have so many participants, if you turning your camera off and just hitting that mute button to allow our panelists to have the floor, and in this case, the screen. If you, we should have time at the end for Q&A. So if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, I will grab them out of there. Or if you want to jot them down and save them to the end.
That's really good. That's really nice.
But we'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end. And side note, for those of you who sent questions in advance, thank you. That was super helpful. Lastly, I am recording this event, so I will be sending it out to everyone who's registered. And feel free to share that with other parents or professional connections who may be interested in this information. Tom and Katie, did I miss anything?
Bring it over here and sit on the couch.
I'm going to work out while I listen.
I'll allow it.
That's.
Hey, Abby and I are going to go out for a few minutes.
Maybe just one more reminder for everybody, if you'll use that mute button so that we don't hear side conversations, that would be a great help.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Katie. All right, well, if not, let's get this party started. And what we'll do is I would love to have our parent start with an introduction, and then I will lead us in with that first question. So panelists, if you wouldn't mind sharing your names, where you're from, your son or daughter's name, how long they were a student or have been a student at CLE, and whether they were on an academic or career track, that would be great intro. Diana, would you mind leading us off with that?
Sure, I'm Diana and I'm in Houston, Texas. And so my son Brendan is at CLE Austin. And he started as on the academic track. and then decided to go on the career track. And he's actually gone from CLE to ILE now, and he was part of CLE for a year. So I know Katie very well.
Great, thank you, Diana. Jenny, would you like to go second?
Sure. My name is Jenny. I have Ben, and my son Ben is with CLE in Denver. He's on the academic path, and I think we're on our 5th year.
That's great. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you guys both for being here. And Missy, would you like to jump in and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Missy Adamy. My son Daniel is at CLE Austin. He's in his 3rd year, and he started in the career track and is now still doing some career and working towards a certification at the junior college there.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Colin.
Hi, everybody. Really happy to be here and enjoying the Zoom with you all. My name is Colin Cass. I am the owner of Parent Coach Professionals, and we are a team of coaches that work with parents who have young adults who are attending CLE. We work with programs all around the country, but we've been working with CLE for, I think, like 8 or 9 years now. Katie, same thing. I should have thought about that beforehand. I know that I have personally been working with CLE for the past 5 years and have been doing coaching for several of the locations. If you haven't worked with me, you've worked with one of our other coaches, or at least gotten emails from our other coaches, and really just supporting families throughout their time at CLE and going through the entirety of the process. So really happy to be here with everyone.
Great. Well, thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in with our questions. And because we haven't really assigned questions to any of the panelists, please feel free, if you all have something to share or to add with each of these questions, we would love to hear from each of you. So question number 1, what were you worried the most? What worried you the most before sending your son or daughter to CLE? What most worried you?
I answer that one.
Ready.
So I'm just going to be really, really open about this. So Brendan had to drop out of school because he wasn't doing well in his first year of college. And he came home and he was incredibly depressed. He was suicidal, and we were at our wits' end. Like, he was just staying in his room, and we couldn't get him out. And then one of therapists recommended that we look at CLE, and it really seemed like the right thing because honestly, you guys, I thought my husband and I might get divorced over this. Like, it was the most stressful period in my entire life. And we went to CLE, we all agreed he was going to go to CLE. And my biggest fear was that he was going to continue his behavior, that he wasn't going to thrive and he wasn't going to engage. And honestly, that did not happen. So it was, I mean, obviously I'm on the panel, but he really has done better than I ever thought he could at CLE.
Jenny or Missy?
I mean, so many things were a concern with finishing high school, living independently. I don't think I ever thought Ben would move out of the house. The social piece, he came from a really small high school where he had a couple friends-ish. Looks different than other friendships, but he had a few people he would have called friends. Just so many worries that eased our mind. I feel like he just really thrived from the beginning. He really adapted. He's been there a long time, but I think it's because it's so good. I'm afraid to rip the Band-Aid off and take him out of it. So it's just been absolutely amazing for him. So I think the similar fears when my other kids went off to college. I think all my kids could have benefited from the support that CLE gave. Obviously, Ben needed it more than anybody, but I really feel like those daily independent skills are just incredible, and he's really, come a long way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo what what our last person just said. I was actually getting him at CLE wasn't as scary as the prospect of not having a place like CLE for our son, because I recognized he's our fifth, and I recognized that he was normal in the ways that my other kids were when they were 18. They didn't want to hear anything from me. They didn't want to take my advice. They didn't, or direction. So who was going to be that person that was going to help them figure out the next steps when he really couldn't figure it out himself? So my biggest fear was that, or just who's going to help me with this really was a desperation, like what resources are there really for a young adult who's neurodiverse to find his way without his mommy and daddy hovering over him like a helicopter. So CLE just has been that for us. We've really trusted them, and we couldn't be happier with how our son's been able to grow and develop and mature.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. We had a lot of questions come in about the 4 pillars of support, or that were focused on the 4 pillars of support. So I do want to ask a couple of those questions. So the first one was on transportation. And what does transportation look like for your student at CLE? And have they learned to navigate the community that they're in by using public transportation? And how has that gone for your students?
I'll start. My son drives, and so he has a car, so it was pretty easy. So he has not figured out public transportation. He takes Ubers because he's now 21. So when he thinks he's going to drink, he takes Ubers, and he's taken with a social outing. He took the train down to Central Austin once, so he knows how to do that. But he drives, and he offers to other people that he can take them in his car. And so there is sort of that sharing social environment there.
And I will add to Diana, just because this sometimes comes up as a question, excuse me, from parents, is that Brendan is a great example of a student who did really, really well with a car. We've had other students who have come with cars who have not done as well, because if they weren't committed to being here and fully engaging, then that car can be a really easy escape to not, be fully engaged in the community. So that's a question to consider if a student is thinking about CLE, and if they drive, whether it would be ideal to have a car or not.
So
Jen?
my son doesn't drive, but the CLE Denver campus is walking distance to the university he goes to, but he does work, and he takes the light rail. And the other night he called or texted because it was really cold out. He had taken the light rail to work. It was late at night, or I don't know, dark, and he had to take the light rail. The light rail didn't show up, so he hopped on a bus, and then the bus dropped him off, and he didn't know where he was, so he called an Uber, and then he walked home. So he's done it all. That in itself, my other kids were like, "That's amazing. He made it home." Scared me a little, but he's resourceful, and that is, he had never set foot on any of those forms of transportation before CLE.
My son also didn't drive when he went to CLE, and we live in a place locally that does not have any public transportation, and CLE was really great in accompanying him and teaching him how to use public transportation and other things like Uber. In the Austin area, there's a couple other things that are more local for shorter trips they can use. And he got really independent with it. And I even have him ride a megabus home. We live a good 3 or 4 hours from Austin, and he rides a megabus even to home so that he can be fully independent with his travel. And it has motivated him to want to learn to drive, where when he started at CLE, he was too afraid to even consider it. He would tell us he was going to always bike, just crazy. But so CLE really helps him gain that confidence a little bit at a time, which I would like to, is a reassuring thing to know when you're sending your kid off that hasn't had any experience. They accompanied him until he could do it independently, until they knew he was going to fly. And I've never had him say, oh, I got totally lost and panicked and had to call the emergency line. They really made sure he was ready to do it before he did it.
Great.
Yeah. And Jamie, if I can just speak really quickly to one of the questions that came in the chat, just because it was related to something that parents shared in the introduction. The average length of stay at CLE is 2 to 3 years, but that is a true average. Some students like Brendan are with us for a year, and that is the amount of time that they needed to get the skills that they needed and be ready to move on. Other students, like Jenny's son, it sounds like has been with CLE longer, like 5 years. And like Tom said in his response, what we were going to do always is work with the individual student and the family and the CLE team to determine, as they are becoming more independent in each of the areas that we're supporting them in, our job is to fade or to work ourselves out of a job and to fade ourselves out of the picture over time. And so their CLE programming and contract and price also will fade over time, especially as you get into that 3rd, 4th, and beyond year for those students that are with us for longer.
Yeah, if I could piggyback off of that real quick, in the case of Ben, we reduced his supports in the last few years as he's demonstrated more confidence in independent living skills, financial, so on and so forth, to where first couple of years he had independent living skills once a week in his apartment. Now he does it more like once a month. He does financial once a month. These are things that he's reduced as he's demonstrated that confidence. And he came in, I always like to say about Ben, he came in making microwave meals, but now he's cooking like salmon and chicken and trying like recipes that you're like, holy cow, is this the same guy who came in so long ago? So like he demonstrated that over time. And what he does now is really focused on, he meets with his advisor, he does some tutoring, but really this semester in the past year, he started using more of the tutoring on campus, which is free, accessible to all students. So he's like he's slowly like turning over to independently taking over managing his tutoring in a lot of those pieces. So I just wanted to share that to show what it looks like longer term. Is a student who might be in their 4th, 5th year looks very different than a first year student. And I'll add too that I'm very proud of Ben that he's going to school. He transferred to a university from community college, but he's also working like 3 days a week. So he's a really busy guy, and he's working. He's putting money towards his monthly budget. So I'll pause there and maybe pick it back up.
Well, great. So let's move on to question number 3. And for those of you who are adding questions to the chat, thank you so much. I'm actually putting those into a Q&A kind of a spreadsheet. So I'm keeping track of those questions, and then we'll come back to it at the end. So thank you. I am documenting those, so we'll make sure we get to them at the end. So this question came in regard to independent living skills. And so the question is, what is an independent living skill that you've observed your student improve on during their time at CLE?
This is a hard one because like the answer is everything. So he was just so like lazy at home. I was thinking, how is he going to live on his own? Like I really had questions about it. And he is now fanatical about his budgeting. He came home and said, hey, Mom, you got to use this Mint thing. And then he told me, hey, this week or this month, I spent $20 more on gas than I normally do. Like, he's frugal. It's fantastic. So he does shopping now, and he knows exactly how much he's going to spend. He cooks almost every meal in his apartment. He does his budgeting. He cleans his place because we get on FaceTime and I can see his apartment. I'm like, what is going on that this child is Like, honestly, I don't even know who he is anymore. Like, it's fantastic.
Just really trying to bring the tears on Diana. Okay, she's she's gonna get me before the night's over.
I would agree. Daniel, when he left for CLE, has, besides his neurodiversity, he also is a type 1 diabetic, and he was really good about taking his medications and everything, but he was scared to use the phone. He was scared to learn how to pump gas into my car. He was scared to make a transaction on his own. He certainly wasn't taking public transportation. He was always very OCD, so he was pretty good at keeping things neat and clean, but his experience with cooking was mostly microwaving, or peanut butter and jelly, which is still a favorite. You don't take all that stuff away when they go, but now he calls and makes his own doctor's appointments. He had no experience with finances at all because he didn't go anywhere or do anything. And he was at the year of COVID, when everything shut down, when he was just starting to kind of take off a little bit, everything shut down, which also shut that down. But he has a job now. He is going to community college. He gets himself there. He takes care of his finances. He takes care of his place. He's advocated for a roommate who's had some struggles in ways that we never could have imagined. So responsible and mature reactions to things. I can't even say how many independent living skills he has, because it's like Diana said, it's like a whole new person, and it's so exciting to watch as he gains those skills. It's really, and he's dating. This is shocking to us, but wonderful all at the same time. He has true friendships, people he can relate to, which goes to the social. But if he didn't have that confidence from those independent skills, I don't think he would have gotten there. So
I think the big ones for Ben are probably cooking, like Tom mentioned, and I think advocating for himself when he has to go pick up a prescription, or like someone else mentioned, making doctor's appointments. Those things that as a mom, like, that's what I do.
Mhm.
Those are great. Thank you so much. Is there anything else about ILS that you guys want to add? I know that's a big one.
One thing that I would just add to this, if you guys don't mind, is that I love that these two questions are back to back, because I can't say how often I'm talking to parents and they see improvements in transportation or public transportation for their child. Really being able to acknowledge and see when a young adult is learning how to be able to get a certain place, whether that's Uber, whether that's public transportation, whether that's driving themselves. So often parents will get on calls and say, I just didn't think he was going to be able to do it, or I didn't think she was going to be able to get here to there, or be able to come home for the break. And the reason I love it as a parent coach is because parents are sort of forced to have to step back from that and to be able to just trust the process of, like, they're going to have to navigate their anxiety around getting on a bus and practice their executive functioning. And if they're running late, the bus driver, who doesn't know them, isn't going to say, oh, well, they're always late, so I'll just wait. They're just going to leave. And that's a really common natural consequence for a young adult to have to experience. So to be able to see the growth in transportation, but also to be able to see growth in parents when they have to step back and say, I hope he makes it home for the holiday, or I hope he makes it to his doctor's appointment. And if not, I know that CLE is going to be able to be there to help them with the process.
So one comment, we're making this sound like it's the panacea of wonderfulness. Like, it's so hard. Like, Brendan still, he was being like dingy, and I said, are you still on your meds? He's like, oh, I haven't picked him up in a couple of weeks. I mean, that was like last week. Or he never checks his mail. I mean, so there's progress, but there's like, it depends. So I don't want you to think that this is like quick or easy or 100% either.
Great point.
Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so moving on to a question about social supports. what has social engagement looked like for your student while they've been at CLE? And have there been any real life situations where you've observed them applying these new social skills that they've learned as a student with us at CLE?
For Brendan, this is where he struggles the most. So I really, Missy, you need to help my son figure out how to get a girlfriend. So he's participated in a lot of the social things at CLE, but he doesn't love it, and he hasn't gotten great friends until he got a part-time job. Now he's going to things like, I've told him to do Dungeons and Dragons for like 5 years, and now
Right.
he's going and doing it every Tuesday night. I'm just thrilled. Some of the things that I saw that surprised me were I texted him something that was a joke, and he wrote back and said, "Mom, I'm not great at humor, and especially over text, it's very hard for me. Was this a joke?"
Aw.
Nice.
He also does crazy things, like when he comes home, he speaks, and then I speak, and then he speaks instead of him speaking all the time. And he has more empathy. Like these are things that obviously come natural to many of us, but it didn't come naturally to him. And I can tell that he's learned it. And that was a benefit that I didn't really expect.
Do you want to eat up here? So
Sure.
keep listening. Are you on mute?
You're missing?
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add?
So the girlfriend thing was actually just having peers that Daniel could relate to. He came from a private school setting, which was great for him because they really met him where he was, but he didn't find peers that related to him at school. And so when he came to CLE, having other people who had similar experiences helped with that empathy piece that I think Diana sees. And then he was definitely like Diana, where he wanted to participate in a conversation, but it was very much like he really wanted to help people. And so it was a lecture all the time about something you should know that he'd seen on YouTube. It was exhausting, especially for his little brother who had to be in the car with him a lot. And now it's much more of a mutual conversation when we talk. He's able to listen and respond appropriately. And that took a long time. I think his poor first advisor, I think he decided to switch careers after Daniel because he wore him out with his stubbornness on it. Just kidding. I think he went on to school, but that was really a long time coming for him to be able to see the empathy and be able to listen to other people and share ideas and understand when somebody disagrees with you, that they are not, that you're not at odds, that it's okay to disagree with someone and still have a conversation. That doesn't mean that it's affecting your self-esteem, or you just have different ideas about things, and that's okay. But that's taken a long time. I think that's been one of the last things that have clicked with him recently that's been wonderful.
And I think for Ben, it's going to be probably a forever. He loves the socials. I think if he could afford to go to all of them, almost all of them, he probably would. But that's something that he does take into consideration, is budgeting around social things. I think, he definitely takes the redirection better. He would tell you all about anime for 3 hours, of course, if you would listen. But I think now he will sit down and he'll start the conversation and ask a question. You can tell that he really just wants to wait till it gets to him, but we all appreciate that he is making the effort. And I know that that's from the social coaching and the gatherings from CLE, that he's, it's better. It will, I think, will forever be, something he's working on, but he does really enjoy the social events.
I was just going to add to something that happened this week, Missy. I don't even know if you've seen the note about this yet for Daniel, but maybe the end of last week. Something that we often see that evolves as part of kind of the social skill development is students being able to advocate for themselves. And Daniel was working with a tutor on campus at ACC at the community college where he's taking classes, and it's the TA for his class. So probably another student who's probably pretty young and inexperienced too. And he shared in his social coaching session after being having some tutoring sessions with her that he felt like she was getting annoyed with him, or he was picking up on some irritation in their interaction. And his social coach worked with him and suggested, hey, why don't you have you disclosed your disability? And Daniel said, well, the professor knows, because he had accommodations set up and everything, but he hadn't specifically said anything about that to the TA. And so together they worked and wrote an email that Daniel sent to just share a little bit about his learning differences and apologize that, maybe he didn't let him know sooner, but that it might help in their work together for them to know that, he might have to take a little longer to process, just disclosing about how he works best. And the TA wrote back and was very positive about what he shared, and said that apologized for letting her frustration show. So I was telling Daniel earlier today, actually, thank you for doing that, Daniel, because you gave her a very important lesson in that situation as well. And also hopefully makes, in future tutoring sessions, if he works with her again, their interactions go better. So that self-advocacy piece is huge and something we're always trying to reinforce and encourage and support students in doing.
Thank you, Katie. If I could share real quick about Ben, I just wanted to share like two things I see where he's made some improvements. Is Ben came in the program and, he had a lot of rigidity. And I think one thing we've seen change is he's become more flexible. And like, example, one year it was like we had to cancel a social because it was like a blizzard outside. And he just was furious. He was like, well, why is this happening? Why can't we still go? We've got a van. And I've seen him become more flexible and just understanding of like, oh yeah, the weather's bad. We'll go next time. He's gotten better with the flexibility. And I would also say too, I've seen him receive feedback better from staff, from peers, and peer feedback is the best, of course, because that's really what gets them to think more. But I do see him receiving feedback and implementing it. And I think he's gotten better at like reading the room more than he used to. One thing that he shared in one of our town hall meetings a couple of weeks ago is, general etiquette in classroom. One thing he said was like, well, yeah, you can't dominate the classroom. You raise your hand, you say something, but then you allow other people to talk. I'm like, wow, that's like some great improvement, and kind of shows where he's made, some little improvements here and there. And I think that's stuff you see over time.
That's great. That's great. Questions are fantastic. Keep them coming if you've got them. And as they come up again, I'm putting them into a Q&A query. So next question is in regard to staff and parent communication, that team that you build. What if you have questions or concerns, or you have some input to share about what your student is doing, either from the staff perspective or from the parent perspective, what your student is doing either at CLE or at home, and can you share that and what that communication looks like between parent and staff?
First of all, there's this parent portal that every time Brendan has anything with CLE, they write in there, they write what happened, and they always write something specific about, was Brendan late, which is one of his huge problems. And so I saw there were tons of late and we had to talk about it. And so you can kind of get an idea from going through those, although it's overwhelming because CLE will meet with your child a lot. And then Katie, I forget what the word is, Katie, you're like its main
Student advisor.
The student advisor. So you have one main person who looks at him holistically. And for us, it was Katie. And so anytime there was something going on or she had a question, Katie would email me and we would get on the phone. And anytime that I emailed her, I mean, I probably got an answer within, 3 or 4 hours max. I mean, she was super responsive. And the thing that really got me is that, Katie, you know my kid. Like, it was so amazing because Brendan, Brendan's different. You know how they say, like, if you know one autistic kid, you know one autistic kid. And it was just really amazing that she knew my kid so well. And so the communication between us has been really easy. And I always felt very supported and I could get a hold of people.
I would agree. I've never had a concern about reaching out or getting a response from any one of the members of his team. I think I used to read best notes constantly, and I will admit that I don't read them as much. They're wonderful to read, but you guys work with them so much and put a note in for every interaction that you have, which is wonderful the first couple of years. And now I call Ben and he tells me what's going on, and if I need anyone else in the team, they're there. But yeah, I've never had a concern about communication.
I have a similar experience as both of you with my son. I pretty much have only ever emailed the advisor. The best notes are great because I work at a school, and teachers always say, "I'll believe half of what your kid says if you believe about you, if you believe half of what your kid says about me." It's so true because they're still teenagers and they're talking amongst each other, and they get their ideas that are sometimes not true about their situation there and how the staff's treating them or whatever. And then you read the best notes and you see the other side of the story. And then you're like, okay, so the reality somewhere in the middle there. But if there's a question or you see, Daniel had several times, he often misunderstood what was going on and we'd have to talk through it. And it was through communication with the advisor that I could see where he was hearing I could hear how he heard Daniel and I heard something different from Daniel. And through us emailing back and forth, we got to the middle of what really was the problem. And that way he could make that progress with Daniel. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but it made sense to me at the time. So we did have some struggles, but it was more trying to understand what he was hearing and what was being said. But the staff was always happy to answer any question you had about that. Really, I've only had to have one phone call, which is pretty good.
Great. All right, well, on to the next question. So this is also in regard to the partnership between CLE and parents. In what ways have you as a parent and the CLE staff team partnered together to set and reinforce clear expectations to help your student make progress?
We had a big one, which was Brendan not only was late, he stopped going to some of the sessions and did not tell anyone that he wasn't going to go. And so Katie had to get a hold of me and we had to partner together to talk about and we got on the phone with Brendan about what his responsibility was. We also, as he was transitioning from academic and saying he's just not ready for school, he may go back, but he's not ready right now, to work and setting those expectations about, well, are you going to pay some of your expenses? How much are you going to work? Katie and I partnered really well to get on the phone with Brendan and make sure that we had one message to him and we all heard the same thing together. And that was really, really important for me to have CLE reinforce how the rules that my husband and I were putting out there in terms of how much he had to contribute and what that was going to mean to him.
And so helpful for us, for y'all to be really clear on your end of, you're not just going to not show up. We're paying for these supports and services. And so that you're not just going to flush that money down the toilet and we want to be flexible and we want to understand when students are struggling and all of those things. And also sometimes it's just a matter of having really clear expectations and setting the bar high, knowing that if we set it low, they'll reach it and then they'll stay right there. But if we set it high, then that challenges them and keeps encouraging them to strive for more. So that, I think that partnership and having those clear expectations from families is hugely important and helpful to us as well.
I think for us, there have been a couple things we've needed to sort of join forces with Ben's support people at CLE over. One is when he was looking for a job, I sort of guided, we look together for jobs, but he doesn't live with me and he's sort of out there on his own. I needed, the support, who was going to help him prepare for an interview, make sure he got there on time, make sure he figured out how to get there, and then how to follow up. And so we absolutely collaborated with his, I don't know what Karen's title is, but she's amazing, to make that happen. And then the other was a struggle last semester with classes and him being so frustrated. He was not doing well in a class, and really sitting down with the academic person and figuring out what, he needed to seek out tutoring at school instead of CLE. And in the end, he passed the class, but it was with the guidance. He had to go back to his professor to really advocate for himself, and that support, we were on the phone with him or Zoom, but it was the support of CLE that really encouraged him to fight for what he thought was right, and he passed the class. So lots of collaboration.
Yeah, I want to say too, on our end for CLE, like the feedback from Jenny and Jonathan was just crucial. There's certain things that parents see and notice that we might not always see, or things that, you've been their parents their whole life. So like there's a lot that you're going to see that when we're working with them, you're like, I've seen this before. Keep this in mind. And like a lot of that feedback's just important for us to be able to support the student. And that's why it really is like Team Ben that supports Ben, or team whoever that supports whatever students. Sometimes that might include like an outside therapist, but we want to all be on the same page and clear in our expectations, so that it's not that mom and dad say one thing, CLE is doing another, that we're like on the same page. And I think that helps the students, but also like helps us learn how to work with that student, because that first couple of months we got to build up rapport with a brand new student. And it's important to get feedback from the parents and hear how things have gone in the past. Or if there's like crucial times close to the end of the semester that parents are just like, hey, this is going to be tough for my son or daughter, we want to know that stuff and support.
Colin, do you have anything that you want to add about the parent CLE partnership?
I would say that the thing that I would add is in parent coaching, one of the things we really work on in terms of expectations is how to make sure that as parents, we're really specific about what it is we're looking for. I talk with parents a lot about SMART goals, being specific and measurable around what it is they need, right? So instead of like, oh, we want them to be successful academically, it's what is it that you are actually looking for? Because success academically is a bit subjective, right? It could be, well, I got a 60% and that's technically passing. It could be, I went to 80% of my classes. It could be, I completed 85% of my homework assignments. So really working on being clear with expectations. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I think part of it also is trusting the process. Just because we have an expectation as a parent doesn't mean that within 3 to 4 weeks, that's immediately going to start to shift and change, right? Trusting CLE to be able to work with your child, your young adult, emerging adult, to be able to work with them to understand what the expectations are from you as a parent and how to be able to achieve those.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go on to the next question. What do you think has been the most challenging part for your student in their time at CLE? And what's been the most challenging part for you as a parent?
Oh, social for my son, for sure. Who funnily is like actually calling me right now. So nice that he loves to talk to me. It's so wonderful. So the most the most challenging part for me has been letting go. And I really wanted to get to work this in today. So I only had 2 sessions from Colin, not his fault. He followed up with me all the time, and he gave me advice that like stayed with me. And it was, you can't save him. You have to let him fail. And the point of CLE is to have your kids fail and have this safety net to help them learn that it's okay and what to do about it. And he in one of the calls, he gave this alarm clock example. He goes, if your kid is late, which obviously we have that problem, he said, don't say, well, you should go get an alarm clock. Say, like, how did that feel? And what are some of the, why that sounds really frustrating? And what are some of the things that you could do to change that in the future? And that not only helped me with Brendan, it helped me with his younger brother and sister too. So Colin, I didn't ever tell you that. You gave me fantastic advice with him. So for Brendan, he thought he was going to go there and get a degree. And this path of saying his brain is not ready for school now, and going through that and changing his expectations has been hard on all of us. And that's been a big, we're moving from, he went there to go and get through college, to our goals for him are to experience life in the way that he wants to, and have the ability to go out and do what he's passionate about. And I don't think we're completely there yet, but we're certainly further than we were. I remember a call with Colin where I said early on, my biggest concern is that Brendan was going to fail out and not participate and was going to come home. And that was absolutely my biggest fear, because it was awful at home when he was home. And Colin, honestly, you talked me through that. And you said, if that happens, then you have to put these guardrails and you'd make these agreements. And I've used that other places. And so it's been helpful. But this is not, I mean, if you're on this call, it's not an easy process. You already know that. So CLE is probably better than a lot of the things you've already been through.
Definitely letting go was the hardest part, and not stepping in every time Ben needed something. I remember he was getting his cable set up and he needed a longer cable, and my husband went and got it and brought it to him. Right. That was very much a no. Quickly, that we should not be swooping in and saying, hey, but after 18 years, that was a really hard adjustment. And to know, like was said, that they will help and they'll encourage him to be independent and try things and try to get that cord for his cable himself, but they'll be there to help him. But it was hard for us to not, we only live 15 minutes from his apartment, so it was hard to not just go over every time something went wrong. So that was probably the biggest challenge.
Mm-hmm. The most challenging part for our son was being understood and feeling like he was heard, and not understanding the things he didn't already know. Daniel doesn't know what Daniel doesn't know. And so navigating that piece for him was the hardest part, until and seeing that CLE was not there to control him or manipulate him, that they were there to support him and help him take charge of himself. And so the hardest part for me as his parent wasn't the letting go. He's my 5th child. I've done it. I actually like letting go. No, just kidding. Got one more to go. The hardest part for me was helping be that, backing up CLE and saying, no, they really are there trying to help you achieve what you want to achieve, Daniel, and navigating discussions with him to stick to it. He was very determined that it was 2 years and he was out in 2 years, and showing him, look at the progress you've made, and let's see areas you still need to work on. I hear you that you feel like you're done. and convincing him to stay this extra year, which has been just a tremendous year of growth because he's gotten through those barriers of thinking that they're just trying to control him and working against them more like teenagers and young people tend to do with us. So that was the most challenging part for us, was convincing him to just continue on and see the progress and trust it for himself.
Great. Thank you all so much for that. I love hearing all these stories. This is so much fun. So next question is along those same lines, but we're going to flip the script a little bit. What do you think your student has enjoyed the most about being at CLE? And what have you enjoyed the most about being a parent of a CLE student?
So Brendan has been an avid cook since middle school, and he loves the cooking classes and showing off and having people come over to his apartment, and he's got things like laid out. He loves the cooking class because, you know, he likes bragging. So that has been the favorite part for him, I think. I mean, there's lots of things I think that he liked, and getting a job for sure. I mean, for me, the favorite part is that when I talk to him, I say, "Hey, Brendan, how are you doing?" And he says with this like very honest voice, he goes, "Mom, I'm great." And we haven't had that since he was probably, I don't know, 11 or 12. And so he's happier now than he's been in probably 8 or 9 years.
Got chills.
Yeah. Give me right now.
Oh gosh. I think Daniel's enjoyed the social things as well, and he's gotten quite adventurous, which is shocking because I know Diana, I think you mentioned your son stayed in his room all the time. Daniel was definitely that way as well before he went to CLE. So he has a new sense of adventure, and he enjoys going to the social things and trying new things. I think that's been joyful. And then the friendships and having the camaraderie, and he's now found it outside of CLE at his job and at school, which is awesome. And I mean, everything about the experience for us has just been a win. And it's so fun to see your children, however God made them, become these independent people. I enjoy it with my other kids, and not just Daniel, but it's just so fun to see them be able to take charge of their life and enjoy it and be independent. I think that's just been, seeing the growth has just been so much fun and exciting to watch.
I think the independence for Ben, you know, I always thought that when there was a break through a school break, he would come home because this is home. And he actually would prefer to stay in his apartment. He clearly, I don't know if it's us, if we just revert back to, you know, how life was when mom and dad are home, but he's 22. So this is all we ever wanted for him. And this is what he wants. He wants to be in that apartment, cooking, doing chores, going to work. I think he's proud of himself. So that's been the best part.
That's always my favorite part, going to the center and talking to the students and seeing the things that they're doing, and hearing the things that they're doing. And they speak about it with such pride and such joy. Look what I've done. And it's, that's my favorite part. And I know all of your students, and they're awesome. So last question for our parents, not last question for our parents, because we do have Q&A questions, but last submitted question for parents is, where'd it go? Here we go. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a parent whose son or daughter is potentially joining the CLE community?
This is like I mean, it's gonna be obvious, not obvious, but use Colin. I mean, that helped me out so much. And I think Colin and I talked 2 or 3 times, and that was it. But it changed my behavior in a way that I could be more supportive to Brendan. And it was just small. I mean, I told you some of the advice that he gave me, but it completely changed. And I even asked Brendan, I said, hey, Colin gave me this advice. Here's things that I'm going to work on to try to be better. And then I would ask him for feedback, and it sort of changed our relationship and his ability to be open and sharing and share his mistakes with me. And so it was, I mean, you use Colin.
I'm so flattered.
That's my
Thank you so much for saying the kind words.
I wanted to say one thing about that. So when Diana says use Colin, all of our parents, when students join CLE, all of our parents receive 5 coaching sessions with a parent coach professional just like Colin. And so that's great, Diana, that you've used them. And I'm sure Jenny and Missy, you've had experiences as well with a parent coach professional, but all of our parents receive 5 sessions. And so I'm so glad to hear that that's been so helpful. Jenny,
I don't need that. Like, I know what I'm doing. You know what? I needed it.
And Brendan, hearing from you that there were things that you were trying to work on and change, I think that probably helped him a lot, like you said, to be able to open up and to know that this is not, it's not just a me problem, right? It's an us that we're trying to figure out how to work well together.
Jenny,
My advice would really be to allow your children to rely on CLE for direction and to listen to what your children are saying, encourage them, cheer them on, but don't allow them to slip into their old patterns when they come home for a break, which was the advice that my Colin, which wasn't Colin, but our counselor person gave, you know, that when Daniel came home, don't let him slink back into his room and stay in there. Encourage him to help cook a meal since you know he can do it now. And that was good advice. And don't visit them too often is also my advice. I think somebody said when we were sending Daniel, I think it was his advisor, to treat him, or maybe it was you, Katie, to treat him like he was one of our other kids going off to college. And when our other kids went off to college, we didn't go visit them every weekend, or so we didn't go, even though it's fairly close to us, we didn't go very often, which allowed him to experience taking care of himself more often and not having us rescue him. So I thought that really worked out for us that way, allowing him to be that independent person.
I think not having expectations about how, as a parent of a kid who's been in it for 5 years, try not to have expectations about what it's going to look like and when they're ready to be done with the program. I think one of Ben's roommates was, I don't know, 25, 26 when Ben was 20. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, is this what we're doing? Or, you know, are we in this for the long haul? And if Ben could, I think Ben and my husband and I would say, if he could stay in this for and have the support for even longer, we would. But just as we all know, like every kid is different and the goals are different and the successes will be there, but they come at different times.
And then they come back and they share. It's not like they're gone forever. You know, they come back home and they've blossomed in it, and the visits are more meaningful because they have something to share now.
well, that is the last question that I have for parents. I do have 2 questions that were submitted for Colin. And so we'll dive right into those. And then I think we've got time for Q&A at the end. So I do have some questions that were put into the chat. So Colin, these are for you. What are the common themes or topics, questions that are addressed in CLE parent coaching sessions?
Yeah, this is a great question. And Obviously it differs from session to session, and it's obviously going to differ from parent to parent and what they're experiencing. We do a lot of what we call situational coaching, which means, hey, where are things at right now, and what are some of the things that you need help as, or support as, or advice for, excuse me, as a parent. But some of the really common themes that we're discussing, one I would say is absolutely communication. How do you communicate as a parent, and are there ways for you to be able to communicate more effectively? What boundaries are in place? Are there boundaries that need to be shifted in order to make sure that they're healthier? And that could be boundaries that you have in place as a parent. That could be boundaries that your young adult has had or put in place, or that could be boundaries that maybe CLE has, right? Of like, hey, let's try to let them not have, not come home every single weekend. That's a boundary we're setting as a program. So working on boundaries and how to be able to respect those. And then I would say that the third major theme is, how do you, and I say this so often in parent coaching, but how do we make sure that we are keeping or putting your child into more of a young adult role? And that fits into how you communicate with them. That fits into the boundaries that we're holding with them. But it also fits into this idea of, how do you trust the process as a parent and take that step back? Diana spoke to this earlier, of being able to look at, when we step in as a parent, or we communicate as a parent with our young adults, what are our intentions there, right? Is our intention to try to save them in a situation where they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling dysregulated? Because if so, in parent coaching, I'm going to ask you about that. I'm going to say, tell me a little bit about what your intention was when you reached out. Because one of the things that we had spoken on that call was, when you reach out, ask yourself as a parent, am I reaching out because I'm genuinely curious and I just want to check in? Or am I reaching out because I need to alleviate the anxiety I'm having as a parent? And if it's the latter, I'm going to encourage you to either shift that behavior and withhold from reaching out, or reframe that question so that when you're reaching out, it's not something that is just to alleviate your anxiety. I call it being attached to a certain outcome. If you reach out and say, hey, have you made friends? Right? That's not genuine. That's not curious. We want to be able to show up and say, hey, what's it been like navigating the social scene? I'm just sort of curious about it. We aren't attached to hearing, yes, don't worry, I've made friends and everything's fine, because that's more about us as a parent. So that was a lot of words, but I would say those themes are communication, boundaries, and how do we make sure that we're always keeping our child in the young adult role.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. What is your best advice for new CLE families and or families who are exploring college living experience as a potential next step for their student?
Yes. Two pieces of advice. The first one, I don't mean to sound too generic, but is to trust the process. I think that the panel has spoken to this really kind of clearly today, but this is not something that is going to just be this exponential growth where all of a sudden they're just doing well the second they land. There are going to be learning curves, and that's a really, really important part of the process. CLE needs to be able to see your young adults struggle so that they can help them with learning how do they recover from that struggle. And as a parent, as a parent coach and working with parents, I'm constantly reminding parents, it's okay for your child to struggle. It's okay for them to be able to fall down sometimes, because they need to learn how to get back up. And making sure that you have some awareness as a parent of like, I need to trust the process. I need to trust the process. I've talked with parents who've said like, yeah, we're 3 weeks in and his room's still dirty. I'm like, yeah, for sure. Because for 19 years, his room's been a mess. So that's not going to change in 3 weeks. The second piece of advice, and this is sometimes hard for parents to hear, you have to learn to be comfortable with your child's discomfort. Because if you as a parent are constantly trying to step in and make them comfortable, you're only doing them a disservice. You're only keeping them in the child's role, which is, hey, I'm the one who can step in and create your happiness and your comfort and your ease of life. And as they step more into independence, that needs to be on them. And that needs to be on them to utilize self-soothing and being able to use independent living skills, and to be able to utilize CLE as a resource to say, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now. And instead of calling my mom or my dad and saying, hey, can you help me with this? putting it back on them and saying, hey, what do you need to do in order to be able to work through this? And it's really difficult for parents. I really appreciated Jenny's example earlier with the cord, right? Of like just going to the store and picking up a cord, because it's so easy to do, right? Oh, the cord's not long enough. Well, I can stop at I almost said Circuit City. Don't know why. Best Buy. Don't go to Circuit. You can try to find Circuit City. You can drive around for a very long time. But stopping at Best Buy, and like dropping off the cord is a 15-minute thing. And it's very easy for parents to fall into that trap. So being able to really sort of check yourself and say, I need to be okay with my young adult's discomfort, because that's how they're learning to grow. So again, the bullet points, it is trust the process and be okay with your young adult's discomfort.
Yeah, that's great advice, Colin. Thank you so much. And you said Circuit City. I would have said Radio Shack. So
yeah, Radio Shack.
That put me in a different age bracket category. So what incredible information. So thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and your students' experiences and your perspectives. So let's jump into the questions that were added to the chat. So there were several questions about the program being a 2-year program. And I think that's been answered a couple of times, that it really just depends on the student and where they are as to the length of time that they spend at CLE. Katie and Tom, do you want to share anything more about what that individualized support structure may look like?
I guess the only thing I would add to what we said earlier is that this is something that we would do in collaboration with student and parents, all as a team. And typically, at least here in Austin, this happens around the 8th or 9th month of the program or the contract year, so that we all meet, we share accomplishments that we're seeing in all the different programming areas, we share challenges that we're still working on, and then we'll make a recommendation as the staff team about the coming year and the plan, as far as we think you should stay full program, or maybe we think you're doing really great in ILS, and so we think we can fade that down a little bit for the next year, but let's keep academic full based on where you are in your course plan and all of those things. So it's very collaborative, and we would be offering suggestions and recommendations, and then coming to a final plan before the new contract is drawn up and made for the next year. The goal is not to go from all to nothing with support, right? The goal is to fade, so that as the student is managing more independently, we're still kind of checking in, but less often, and making sure that they're maintaining the skills that they've gained in their time here.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I threw in the chat in Denver, we do progress report meetings twice a year to discuss, like, how are things going? Are things going, what's going really well? What are challenges, and what are, like, either goals we're still working on that might have been around for a year, or like, what are some new goals that we want to work on? For students who've been around longer, those goals do change over time, and do the students always, accomplish that goal? Sometimes it's an ongoing process. So, this is the important part of why we have these meetings. And as Katie said, CLE meets as a team, and we do discuss, is this student ready to reduce on independent living skills every week? Are they ready to reduce on that? Does the student want to reduce on it because they don't want to meet with someone in their apartment and have to, get feedback about their toilet being dirty? Do they really need it? So we kind of look at, would it by reducing to every other week ILS, is that going to push the student in a direction where they're becoming more independent and where they can work towards, further independence? So, I think, sorry if I'm repeating myself, but this is why we have the progress report meetings, why we collaborate, so that we can discuss those things. And, we also want the student to have a voice in these meetings as well. And always, because, maybe they have some insight that me and my program director chair, I'm not seeing as much as the student is. So we do want the student to speak up and become, more vocal as we're doing more of these progress report meetings, showing that they're, like, taking more control and ownership over their life and their goals. And, often I could write goals for students all day long, but I want to hear what their goals are and where, their goals align with goals that I have in mind that the parents have. And that's kind of the work. And as folks have said, it does take time. And I agree, it sounds generic, but trust the process. It does take some time, but students don't become independent and live on their own overnight. That it looks different for everybody. So this is why we do these meetings. And I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. So next question, but this is for Katie and Tom, can you review the basics of the different tracks, the academic and the career tracks?
Yeah, so generally speaking, students at CLE are either focused primarily on academics or on career development. And in addition to those areas, they're also getting support with independent living skills and social skills. So those are the two constants, the independent living and the social skills, if they're part of the full program. And the choice is between academics or career. But having said that, it's also not an either or all or nothing kind of a choice. As both Diana and Missy shared, their students started with one track and then through the process switched or started kind of doing a little bit of both. Daniel has a job and is also going to school, so he's getting a little bit of both. Brendan was initially only focused on, college academics and goal of transferring to a four-year university. Ultimately decided, okay, this is not for me right now. Maybe I'll go back to that later, and instead did a short-term certification at ACC that taught him to climb electrical poles in a very impressive way, and prepared him to apply for full-time work in that field like immediately. So he totally can go back to school later, but the idea is CLE can be that constant thread of support as they're navigating that, because as with most of us who, I don't know, changed majors in college a few times, or maybe started college and stopped and went back later, it's usually not a straight path for the vast majority of people. And so the benefit of CLE having both options is that we can support students as they're navigating that and figuring it out and trying a little of this or a little of that. We do a career assessment with every single student that walks in the door, whether they're an academic focus or a career development focus. And so, that can also open new pathways and doors that they maybe hadn't even considered before. Sometimes a student might come in and have no interest in college whatsoever, and then realize through that career assessment, oh, okay, wait, there's a short-term certification program I can do right down the road at ACC, and that could actually earn me a lot more money in a job. And so then they're ready to go to school. So I hope that helps. If there's any more specific questions about the different tracks of programming, I'm happy to answer those.
Well, Katie, Jen just put a quick question in the chat about the assessment that we do with all academic and career students. Either you or Tom
Sure.
touch on the Greenwood really quickly.
Yeah. So as Katie said, we do an assessment with all students when they come in, whether academic or career, and it's called the Greenwood assessment. It does some career matching, as in it, you do the assessment, kind of list out your interests. We sit down and do this assessment with the students so they don't just click, 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 go to the next page. We want to make sure that it's like a meaning, that they're giving meaningful answers. So we sit down with them, we have them do this assessment, and it does generate different jobs and career kind of fields or job groupings. So it does suggest things based on how they answered. It also does include like a Myers-Briggs personality test. So it gives like kind of an example of like, what kind of learner are they? What kind of communicator are they? So a lot of those things together go to, we get this assessment. It's not done there. The real work in doing the Greenwood assessment is reviewing the assessment and then a lot of the work that comes from it. So, if a student's like, hey, I'm really, oh, wow, I matched for, going into being a lobbyist. That sounds really cool. What is that? So some of the Greenwood assessment is like, let's sit down and let's learn about what a lobbyist is. And it can go further and further and further. If a student's interested in that, like, hey, let's find a lobbyist that's in the Denver area. Let's see if we can reach out to them and do some job shadowing. Let's interview them and ask them what their job's like, what they like, what the pay's like. what the benefits and vacations like, because these are all the questions that go into a job. So the Greenwood assessment is itself like a process. You do the assessment, but then you do the work, and that work kind of like it really does just tie into the career development work that we do. We're helping students on the career end, like find a job, get prepared for the job, get ready for the interview, all of those things. So the Greenwood assessment is really just like a tool that we use, and it's not the end all be all. I've had students get lobbyist and was something that they were not interested in at all. So that's why we do the work in looking through it and seeing if it is something that's of interest to them. The other thing I wanted to say about the different pathways, academic, career, Katie touched on this, it can be fluid. I'll use Ben as an example. Ben has mostly been an academic student, but there's been times where we did pivot to focus more on career. So Ben did do the Greenwood assessment. We did, we did support him in finding a job, preparing for the interview, down to like, what are you going to wear to the interview? And let's like have you wear that, come to the office, and we'll give you some feedback. So, Ben did, and this is all the while he was in school and taking classes. So it looks different for each student. And this was a goal for Ben to like work to contribute to some of his cost of living. So really we saw there is he was an academic student, but did use some career programming to help him get the job. And really now he's got the job and he's maintaining it pretty well. And we do check in on it, with his advisor. They check in on how his job's going, how his volunteering's going. So, in that sense, we have a lot of students who are academic. Once they get through like first year, maybe by second year, we do want them to step it up. If they're ready and they're managing school, they're keeping up with their classes, maybe the next goal is looking for a job. And then all of a sudden we have a new goal. Let's figure out how to balance your academic life and your job and your social life. And that's where there's, a lot of work and where things can kind of, then we're talking about independent living skills support to support the student with finding, a new uniform for their job, or social, where it's like, hey, how can you use this opportunity at your job to get to know some of your coworkers and make some plans? One of my students went to the first Friday art walk in Denver with some of their coworkers and had a great time. They also got a tattoo and didn't tell their mom, but they had a good time, and they were being safe. And honestly, they were being, a young adult who's of college age. They did those kind of things and they were being safe. I'll pause here.
That's great. Missy and Diana both just added comments to the chat. So if you all want to go in and take a look at those, great added comments to what Tom was talking about the skills assessment and the career assessment. So let's go next question. How many credits would you suggest a student take during their first semester when they first come to CLE?
That's a great question. So Tom, I'm interested to hear. I bet we say close to the same thing. We usually recommend in Austin one college class the first semester, maybe two. And that's a really strong maybe, depending on the student. But they're going to have at least the equivalent of 2 or 3 additional college classes worth of work and things to do in their schedule from all of the things that they're doing that are even above and beyond what maybe a traditional college freshman would be doing, like, grocery shopping, preparing meals. There's no meal hall or dining hall at CLE. And sometimes parents are concerned about that because it's not the traditional, dorm living and dorm setting. But truthfully, you never know how that college path is going to go if you go the traditional college route. And the skills that our students are working on from day one of living in the apartments and grocery shopping and meal planning and cooking and managing their budget, all of those things are going to carry on with them, whether that means when they transfer to a 4-year college to live on campus, like some of our students have done after CLE, or when they move into full-time employment after CLE, or whatever the case may be. So they're going to have a lot to do. They're going to be busy. And we also really want to build on success. And so starting small with classes is a way to do that, because it can be harder to bounce back and recover from a failure, and usually when failures happen in school, it's not just the one class that they struggle with. If they're struggling with one class, then it becomes a domino effect, and suddenly they may not be doing well in any of the classes that they're taking, even if one of them was supposed to be like an easy class, a gimme kind of a grade class. So starting small, building on success, working on those executive functioning skills. And then over time, some students do take 2 classes, 3 classes, et cetera, in a semester. But again, starting small and building from there is generally the way we go.
I agree with Katie, 1 to 2 classes. Really because they're living on their own perhaps for the first time ever. But also not just because of like the school itself. Katie was getting into this, and then there was a question in the chat about what else do they do if they're doing career. We do, students have 20 to 25 hours of services per week. So that is 30 minutes of advising each week, 30 minutes of financial each week, one-to-one ILS, independent living skills, working in the apartment on cooking or cleaning. We have ILS groups like cooking group, transportation group, grocery group, adulting group. We do one-on-one tutoring. Students, I mentioned, meet with their advisor, but they might also meet with the academic coordinator to meet with their advisor on campus or to meet with the accommodations office. We also do social events and social engagement group. So this all is the 20 to 25 hours in a week. And I think it's, it is important to talk about this. And this is why we only want 1 to 2 classes, because all the 20 to 25 hours of service is meant to help that student adjust. That weekly grocery group is so important for that student to set a weekly routine to get to the store, to stay in budget, to make sure that they're making a grocery list and not just like, I'm hungry, I'm going to the store. And then they leave with all the chips and ice cream. Like sit down with them and make a routine out of that. And that's really, why that first semester is busy, because they have to feed themselves 3 times a day, because they got to get up and get to class, because they got to take their meds and they got to do homework and all the other things. So it really does get busy. And as Katie said, start small. Because we have had students try to take more than 1 or 2 classes, and sometimes they end up just getting overwhelmed or having to drop a class. And it's better to just kind of start out easy, do like 1 gen ed perhaps, and maybe 1 class of interest. Like, oh, look, they got music appreciation, history of rock and roll, and English composition 1, which every person has to take. That's usually a good start to your first semester at CLE.
And I guess the one other thing I would add too is that while they are busy, we do not have them scheduled every minute of every day. So there is also going to be some white space or free time on their schedule, just like any other college student, right? Because when you go off to college, there often is a whole lot more free time. Maybe even if you're taking a full course load of 4 classes, you're going to have a 9 a.m. class and then a few hours before the 1 o'clock class or whatever the case may be. So that is another skill for our students to work on, is how do I navigate and manage this free time in between my sessions and not get lost down the rabbit hole of YouTube or TikTok or whatever it is, and then not make it to my next session. And by the way, if that happens, we're going to call them if they don't arrive for their sessions. And if they're not answering their phones after a few calls, we're going to go across the street here in Austin to the apartments and knock on their door. And so there is that extra level of accountability and also support, because sometimes it's just, oops, I overslept, or, oh man, I failed that test last week and now I don't even want to face the professor again in class, so I'm avoiding it. And so having just that supportive staff, they're non-judgmental, smiling, hey, let's get going, let's get your day started, because usually once they're out the door, they're fine. But just, I like to add that part in about free time, because sometimes parents worry about that when they first see the schedule. Well, what are they going to do in that hour or 2 hours in between things? Well, we're going to help them figure that out, but we can't decide it for them.
The test that they come and knock on the door when your kid doesn't go. That happened to my kid a lot.
He's not alone.
So just, I hate to interrupt. This is such a great conversation, but we've only got 4 minutes left before Zoom tells us we are done. So I want to, from the questions that came through the chat, it sounds like we have really covered or answered throughout the conversation the questions that came through the chat. If we've got any other questions, feel free to email me directly. I have emailed several times the registrant list. And so you all should have my direct email address. If you have additional questions, please throw those into an email and I will get those either to Katie, to Colin, to Tom, and even to our parent panelists. If you've got questions for them, I would love to get everyone's questions answered. But if you know, because now we've only got 3 minutes left, is there anything that will take just a minute? If anybody has a quick question, we can wrap it up with that. No? Camille?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Again, you've all got my email address. This is being recorded. And so I will be sending out this recording. Please feel free to share as you see fit with others who you think this information would be helpful to hear. And thank you again to our panelists and to Colin and to Katie and Tom. Thank you guys so much just for everything that you do and for all of your support. And we love hearing the stories about how your students are growing and developing and are going to, you know, launch into life independently and be thriving themselves. We're really excited to be have just a little part of that. So thank you again so much for your time tonight. And again, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat for me. And I think we're done. You all can go have dinner.
Thanks so much, parents and Jamie and Colin. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Have a wonderful
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.